Since finishing our van, we've had a lot of questions about how we're able to sleep widthwise in the van, especially since Tim is 6'2".
In this video, we'll show you how we designed and built our bed platform without using any flares.
We're Tim and Katie, and in today's video, we'll be explaining the step-by-step process of building bed bump outs in our Ford Transit. These allow us to sleep sideways in the van and take advantage of more livable space. This means room for a fixed dinette, large kitchen, and indoor shower.
So before even starting the building process, we needed to figure out the height of the bed. So to do that, we had Tim sit down on the floor and figure out exactly how tall his torso would be sitting up, so that when he was sitting on top of the bed, he wouldn't hit his head on the ceiling. So that worked out to be 34 inches to the bottom of the bed from the floor. And then of course you have to account for the mattress height and the height of the platform and everything, so depending on your design. Once we had this sorted, we cut our windows out as high as we could on the factory wall panel. We used the CRL half slider bunk windows, and we put them on both sides of our bump outs.
As a base for the bed platform, we used 3/4 inch plywood furring strips and we mounted them to the van wall using plus nuts. Then behind those furring strips, we mounted a 1x6 board running lengthwise, and then we notched out both of those so that our 1.5-inch aluminum square tubing supports could sit inside it. We used 5 of the aluminum supports lengthwise down the van, and then our bed platform sits on top of that. Similarly, we used 3/4 inch plywood as furring strips around the bump outs, so we mounted them to the wall, and then once we had actually built our bump out boxes, we mounted them into the furring strips to make sure it was all nice and strong.
With the furring strips done, it was time to insulate. So below the bed, we used Havelock wool like we did for the rest of the van, but above, because the bump outs go so close to the sheet metal, we only had space for 2 layers of close-cell foam and 1 layer of Easy Cool, so only an R of 3, but the lack of insulation power was made up for by sleeping widthwise.
Once we'd insulated the wall behind the bump out, we actually started building the bump out boxes, and we did this entirely outside the van in the garage. So the key thing to keep in mind is that the Ford Transit is wider further forward, and it tapers as you get further to the back. So in our bump outs, they were about 4 inches wide at the front, and then they taper to around 3.5 at the back. And what that ends up meaning for the bed is that at the front you have your longest or widest portion around 6'3", and then at the back it's only about 6 feet or 6'1". The box itself was made out of 1/2-inch Baltic birch, and we wanted it to be as wide as possible, so we even went so far as to rounding and shaving down some of the back corners so that we could really try and wedge it back against the wall as far as we could.
Now that we have the bump out box complete, we have to figure out where the window sits within the wall portion of the bump out. So this was quite challenging, takes some patience, but you can do it. So what I did was I ran wax paper along the entire inside of the bump out box. Keep in mind you have not yet screwed in the bump out box because you'll have to remove it to install this portion. But so the bump out box is in place, you have your wax paper, trace along the perimeter of the slider window, and take as many measurements as you can in relation to the bump out box. I took it from the top corner to the bump out, bottom corner of the bump out, from bottom of the window to bottom of the box, etc. As much as you can. That'll help you immensely as you transfer that onto wood. Now that my wax paper template was complete, I took it to the shop and transferred that onto 1/4 inch Baltic birch. Cut the window portion out and then secured it onto the bump out box very carefully. At this point you do not want to split anything, so be very careful when securing the 2 pieces together, and use lots of glue and screws.
After a couple test fits with the bump outs, making sure they fit just right, we moved on to thinking about the LED strips, and we wanted to recess these LED strips so that you could have it as like just a reading light at night, some extra ambiance, or just for the aesthetic. We think of it like a pseudo recess because we didn't do a true dado cut because I had already constructed the whole box and couldn't take it apart. So what we did was just added a 1/4 inch strip of plywood along the top front and left that little gap at the back where our LED strip sits recessed. Then the last part we needed to do was drill a hole in the end for the wiring, and then wire it up to the switches so that both sides operate off one switch.
The last thing we did before doing the finishing was cut out our other switches and power sources. So we cut out our dimmer switch for the overhead lights, as well as the 12-volt charging station on my side of the bed, and the switch for the LEDs and charging station on Tim's side of the bed. Once those holes were in place, we were ready to start sanding. So we started with 150 grit and worked our way down to 220, and then primed and did a couple coats of white paint like we did for the rest of the van. Lastly, around the windows, we used 1/4-inch trim lock to finish off the edging and make it all come together. Once that was all done, we brought the unit back into the van and secured it into our furring strips. That meant upwards, sideways, and down to keep it nice and secure.
At this point we had the bump outs installed and our aluminum square tubing supports all secured. So we measured the dimensions we needed between the bump outs and then drilled out many, roughly 3-inch holes throughout the plywood so that there wouldn't be any moisture buildup between the mattress and the plywood. So we just wanted a lot of airflow to prevent any mold. Once we had the holes cut and all the measurements perfected, then we took the plywood back into the shop and did 3 coats of poly to protect the plywood itself from any moisture. We brought it back out and we pocket holed into the bump outs and then secured down into the aluminum square tubing.
At this point, we put our mattress in and cut it to size. We ordered an RV queen, so we just had to take a tiny bit off of the width and the corners at the back, but then you're ready to go. Obviously, it takes a little more effort and work to make the widthwise bed happen. However, we are so happy that it did end up working for us, as we're able to have a lot more livable space in the rest of the van. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel for more videos.